Good evening. He's a business strategist and company director, and he's been picked by National to challenge Labour's Megan Woods in Wigram. National's Carl Varley and Labour's Megan Woods join me tonight, and Lynched starts right now. Good evening to you. The National Party has put forward businessman Carl Varley for the Wigram seat in Christchurch. He spent 21 years as a company director and says that gives him the edge over Labour's Megan Woods. They both join me now live in the studio. Good evening to you both.
Good evening, Chris. Good evening, Chris.
I want to start with you, Carl. You think you've got the edge over Megan Woods, but why? Because you have no political experience.
So I think what's important here is the skills that you can transfer from the different environments that you get the opportunity to learn in, and it's actually those opportunities and those learning experiences which I hope to bring forward for the people here of the electorate.
Well, let's talk about the experience you think you would bring to the Wigram seat then.
Well, I guess from the first point is in business is quite often people get to see some of the outcomes or some of the successes, but what people don't get to see is some of the scars that you may have from some of those battles that you have to fight to get through there, because sometimes in business can be quite tough and brutal, but also in saying that too, is you've really got to understand how to look after the different stakeholders that are involved with whatever it is that you do. And this is the same thing that we're looking at politics here, is understanding fundamentally who are our stakeholders and what it is that they need, and then make sure that we can deliver something that fulfills what their needs are.
See, my immediate reaction to that is it all sounds very business speak and stakeholders. What I was expecting to hear you say is, what do the residents need? That kind of is a bit concerning. You're talking business and stakeholders.
Yeah, no,
it's not a good start, to be honest.
Well, we're not talking about stakeholders because it's more than just about residents. It's
who are stakeholders?
Well, stakeholders is the collective group of everyone that's affected by the decisions. So we're not talking about stakeholders.
Voters.
Yeah, voters, their families, which is important as well, because really at the end of the day, that's why I'm putting my name forward, is actually we've got some families out there and we need to make things a little bit easier for them.
I'll come to you in a second, Megan, but I want to ask you though, Carl, what do you think is the number one most pressing issue in the Wigram electorate right now, given its incredibly big area of Christchurch?
Yeah, and this has been interesting for me to go out there and actually understand this, because Wigram's issues are really Christchurch's issues. Really, we need to look at this not from an electorate point of view, but actually from a wider point of view, that we can work a lot more collectively with the other electorates. Because it's the same issues, it's the housing affordability, it's making sure that we've got a stronger economy here, it's making sure that we can actually live within our means as a country. And the priority really has to be about how we rebuild Christchurch and how we can set that up so that it creates the opportunities for those people in the area.
Well, let's discuss the number one issue facing many residents, Megan Woods. It still remains housing, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
It still remains unaffordable homes, skyrocketing rents. And it's all very well to say Labour would do this in the Kiwi Build program. At the moment, we have got nothing really in concrete. We do have a government, though, in your area, I think, that's committed to building some kind of social housing, like in Hornby, for example. And to be fair, Dr Nick Smith has been down here many times, digging the soil up with some pretty decent announcements, you have to say. So does that worry you that, in a way, National has been treading on Labour's territory?
No, and what I think we're seeing, the housing development that Nick Smith's announced at Hornby, we're not talking there about affordable housing, we're talking about entry level there of $500,000. This isn't going...
Up to $500,000 to be fair.
Yeah, but $500,000 is out of the price range of most of the people that are locked out of the housing market at the moment. And I disagree with Carl when he says that Wigram's problems are Christchurch's problems, because I think that actually Wigram faces some very particular and some very peculiar issues as one of the least earthquake-damaged electorates in the city. It's actually now, in terms of the recovery, it's where everything's moving to. And we have seen some of the most rapid rises in rents in parts of Wigram. If you look at the suburbs of Hornby, of Hoonhay, of Eddington, of Spraydon, these are suburbs that have 20, 30% rent increases. You've got people that can no longer afford to live in the communities where they once lived.
You're right.
Kids are
moving
moving
scary
school.
Stuff. Carl, that is scary when you do here of cases, and even my personal experience of trying to find just a flat close to ZB Studios in the Addington kind of area, the rent is just off, isn't it?
So to come back to the point that Megan's just raised, is that just isolated to Wigram?
Well, we have seen some of the most rapid rises because they're the least damaged.
Well, the answer is no, because it's actually a broader problem here, and we can't tackle it from a Wigram point of view. We actually need to tackle this as a wider view that affects the whole of Christchurch. And this is my point here, is it's not a problem that's isolated to our area. We actually need to focus on this as actually a much bigger picture. And that's the skills that I think I can bring to this, is actually looking at it from a big picture and actually go, well, what's the long-term solution to this, rather than trying to put Band-Aids on this.
So which is a fair comment, what is the long-term solution then?
Well,
because at the moment we do need short-term solutions when we're going into the fourth winter, and people are still struggling to pay their rent, and that remains an issue, and it remains an issue in Wigram.
Yeah, look, and I think what's important here is to recognise that there's families out there that actually are really hurting from some of this thing, and it's about being responsible, but it comes down to fundamentally a supply and demand issue. And we're talking about new housing. Like when I bought my first house, I couldn't afford a new house. But what that new housing does is it gives the people who actually have got the affordable housing to move up into them. So it creates that base layer of houses that people get into. But we're still a long way away from actually getting back to the same levels of housing that we need to make sure that there's a consistent supply there. And we're trying to do what we can to open up those markets, get a really succinct resource consenting process coming in, but making that process of actually developing those houses a lot better.
Minister Jerry Brownlee said at one stage, and to be fair, it was about 12 months ago now, the market will sort itself out. Do you believe that? The market will sort itself out? Or does there need to be government or council intervention?
So look at the wider picture here. Is the market going to build the number of houses that's required, and how quickly can those houses get built? Because that's really where our hamstring is right now, is their ability to build the number of houses that we need right now, because that's going to take time. And you've only got to walk around some of the new subdivisions in our electorate, Wigram, for example, to see that there is a lot of construction and a lot of building going on.
It's a fair comment, isn't it, Megan? Things are happening, to be fair.
Absolutely, and we're seeing that consents have been granted, but what it comes down to is we have market failure. The market isn't going to fix this. What we've had is we've had a government that actually has let this go on too long. It needed government intervention 2.5 years ago. We're now saying we should have many more houses in those subdivisions in Wigram. That we're seeing, huge numbers go up in Wigram
the argument is easier to make that the government would say, well, we were still dealing with earthquake events after the fact, after the main ones in February 2011.
Yeah, and that is a fair point, but the fact remains that some houses did go up. It wasn't that they couldn't. What we're talking about here is scale and pace. And it is the government's job, and it will be what a Labour government does, that will actually take some responsibility for that. We're saying 10,000 houses in 4 years because it's the government that has to put the kind of energy and impetus behind getting the kind of pace and scale we need to fix this.
We need to take a short break. When we return, we want to discuss the insurance issues that continue to plague our residents in Christchurch. That's next on Lynched. Welcome back to Lynched on CTV. National candidate for Wigram, Carl Varley, and Labour MP Megan Woods are my guests tonight. Megan, the insurance issues that continue to plague our city. Is it fair to say, though, they are now starting to sort themselves out? For better or worse, we do have a small section of people that will go through the court process, but things are getting slightly better, aren't they? Or
For
not?
some people they are.
Yeah.
For a very large number of people, though, they're just still trapped in the bind of being bounced back between EQC and their insurance company, not sure whether or not it's overcap, undercap, the apportionment issues, all the issues that we've heard about for the last 2.5, 3 years as people. And for too many people, there are still tens of thousands of unsorted claims out there, and that's tens of thousands of unsorted lives, and that's what we've always got to remember, and we need to do something about this. If you compare how this has happened, and I know there's lots of things that you can say it's different, the way in which the Australian government dealt with the bushfire situation, the insurance companies, and Kevin Rudd did post the Queensland bushfires, and how that was dealt with. We're seeing a very different model, that we've just let this go on for too long. It requires some very strong action, and you're going to, mean, you've already seen that Labor's come out and we've said, look, we're not going to just let this go on. We're going to put some money up front so we can fund test cases. And once you've got those test cases, then you've got precedent. And it means every person doesn't have to go through that pain.
To be fair, Labor's also announced Kiwi Assure, right?
Yes.
Where it's basically creating another model, though. But that model, in a sense, is similar to EQC because it's money that's already will go from taxpayers. And if you look at the flip side of that, though, aren't we lucky that we have an environment where we've had, for better or worse, private insurance companies that are at least putting millions of dollars back into Christchurch? I know that's not going to be comfort to everybody, but we've still got these Aussie guys that are still putting private money back into Christchurch.
Look, any of the insurance brands that you see set up in New Zealand are front ends for big international insurance conglomerates. What Labor's talking about, this isn't about fixing the pain people are going through now. This is about avoiding it in the future, learning from what we've been through in Christchurch and saying, well, actually, we're going to have a New Zealand-owned company that is going to be the front end that people have to deal with. This is going to be a company that has a stake in this community, that it has a stake to the people that it's beholden to. And look, it worked very well in New Zealand for a number of years. State insurance was a good model, and it was a New Zealand-owned brand. But of course, like every other insurer in the world, they'll have to go back and do the international insurance underwriting with the big players. Every insurer in the world does.
Carl, what I continue to hear on News Talks and Be Talkback is that people are concerned that I suppose potentially your colleagues or your friends within the National Party, they haven't worked fast enough with the insurance companies. They haven't gone in there guns blazing and said, you know what, Southern Response, you've got a month to sort this out. If you don't, we're stepping in.
Yeah, look, and I guess what we're not privy to is some of those conversations that do happen behind the scenes, because I don't know what they are, but you sort of understand now that Southern Response seems to be moving in a different gear to what it was, and they're fronting up. And no one says you get this right every time. Like, we're dealing with something that is just absolutely unheard of in the history of New Zealand. And to come in here and say that, like, Labor's going to put a policy in that's going to create this new thing that they can run more efficiently than what the private sector goes, I don't understand that, because who pays for it and how can it be effective? We've got some issues here.
Let me ask Megan that. It's a good point. Who does pay for Kiwi Assure then?
Well, there's some upfront money from the government, just like there was with Kiwi Bank. So it's quite a similar model. It's about establishment money. That will eventually become a self-funding entity. And if you look to other parts of the world, like Italy, the state-owned bank also does insurance through there, which is another country that's prone to a lot of natural disasters. And actually, it's the most profitable part of their business.
Carl, you're
Can I just address that? Because saying it's going to be a self-funding is Labor's track record on self-funding insurance. If we're going to look at ACC and the blowouts that happened there, and it's taken a national government to get that spending under control. And now, for the first time, we're actually going to see a reduction in ACC levies because of good, strong, stable management of our economy. So for Labor to turn around and say that they couldn't do it then, but they're going to be able to do it now, there's a tax and spend policy that's coming in, and ultimately New Zealanders are going to have to pay for it, and that means people are going to be worse off than what they will under a national government.
Look, that's absolutely just not correct. I mean, that one of the big differences, and it will always be a difference between Labor and National, is around whether or not it's private insurers or the state that runs ACC. National believes it should be the private insurers. We believe it should be the state. There's a whole lot of it. Can I just finish this?
No, that's not true though, Megan.
I'll just finish this, thanks, Carl. That what we've seen is that actually we're not seeing the reduction of levies that could have come through. When you put the profit motive into it, of course it's going to cost more. And the kind of rhetoric we're hearing from Carl here is exactly the kind of rhetoric we heard around the naysayers around Kiwi Bank, that it wouldn't work, it would be a suck on the state's finances, it wouldn't be efficient, but look at it. It's an incredibly successful bank and it is incredibly profitable.
Carl.
So let's come back to that, the point around the ACC and the levies. We are seeing a reduction in the ACC levies. And
we're looking at propping up the surplus.
But when it's through good management, and this is what National actually does, and this is what our track record has been on, is actually we've got very good economic management. And that's why we're seeing the country and the state that it's in.
But you see,
and we can
the truth is, though, with the so-called surplus, we're still borrowing billions of dollars. So I think it's a bit disingenuous of the government to say, oh, we're now back in surplus. Well, many people would think that means we've got no debt. But how much debt are we racking up every day? And this is not just a national thing with respect. Labor was in the same boat, if not at one stage worse. But I get sick and tired of hearing about how we're in surplus when the reality is New Zealand's debt continues to rise every day by millions and millions and millions of dollars.
Yeah, look, and we agree that that's got to be arrested because the whole tax and spend policy means borrow more, and we can't afford to borrow more as a country. We need to fundamentally live within our means. And this is why getting into a surplus means that, because it means we fundamentally start living within our means. We spend less than we make because the government doesn't make any money. The government
And it makes our credit rating okay, doesn't it, to be fair as well?
And it collects the money, keeps the interest rates down, so that we can keep people at sustainable mortgage levels rather than seeing the hike in interest rates of what we were seeing back in the early 2000s under Labor.
So, yes.
Last word, Megan.
Let's put some facts into this. That actually, borrowing has gone up massively under a national government. Labor ran 9 surpluses for 9 years. And we trace back the blowout in spending from this national government to 2009 and the borrowing that had to happen to fund the tax cuts. And that's where a lot of the borrowing started for this government. So New Zealand does have high levels of borrowing under this government, and it's something that we've got to turn around.
But Megan, taxpayers wanted tax cuts. So I get the impression the person on the street wouldn't care where the money comes from. If they have more money at the end of the day, they're happy with that.
But you've got to look where those tax cuts fell, Chris, and that's one of the things that happened. We called it the tax switch at the time. So that what we saw is that we had GST go up, and we had the top end of personal income tax rates come down. For people on minimum wage, for people actually on the average income, they didn't see the benefit. Someone earning a lot of money, someone on an MP's salary saw a huge benefit, but someone, like many of the, I mean, Wigram has with the 6th lowest median income in the country in terms of electorates. For the people on 30 and 40,000, they certainly didn't see any improvement in their personal circumstances.
But when we come back, I want to discuss the good old CBD. It was my pet hate at one stage, the lack of progress. But now, things are starting to turn around. That's next, Lynched on CTV. Welcome back to Lynched on CTV. Carl Varley and Megan Woods are my guests tonight. Megan, I want to start with you. You know my pet hate. Sarah, the CBD, the lack of progress. I was getting sick and tired of going down, driving my little car through the CBD and seeing no progress. I would get depressed, I would get angry and think, surely a government agency can do better. However, last week's announcement with the Vodafone building, $50 million, this to me seems like the first major corporate enterprise that's put a stake in the ground and said, yep, you know what, we'll give Christchurch a go. Notwithstanding just that, the PricewaterhouseCoopers organisation, they're coming back too. Beautiful looking construction there, just near Cashel Mall. Things are now starting to happen. And I never thought I'd say this, I'm excited about buildings.
Yeah.
What do you see in this now? You have to admit there's progress now, Megan.
Oh, I am, and I'm going to say it is fantastic to see. I, like you know, nothing worse than driving through what looks like the war zone and just seeing crumbled building. It's wonderful to see new buildings going up. And I think that we are seeing some energy. I think we need to work at fastening up the timescale of getting the government back into the CBD. I think that a lot of the government departments still being outside in the suburbs, a lot of them actually located in the Wigram electorate, is causing a lot of the congestion, a lot of the parking problems, a lot of those things. And you know my pet
Transport,
peeve, transport, Chris. And what we absolutely have to see is some real impetus around getting that central city transport plan in place, because not only do we need businesses, we need people living in the CBD, we need housing, and we need a way for people to get around efficiently. I really now want to see the implementation plan for the Central City Transport Plan, and I want to see a way. We cannot see transport as something separate from the way the CBD is going to grow. Unless we can move people through it, we're not going to have them there.
Carl, as a business person, you must be getting quite excited, particularly with the Vodafone announcement. To me, that says business is now telling the rest of the world they are confident to rebuild in Christchurch, because apart from Anthony Goff's precinct at one stage, we had Roger Sutton doing his little wee video updates in front of private enterprise, and that would really peeve me off. I think, Roger, stop taking credit for private enterprise, mate. You're a government organisation. You can't take the credit for a multi-million years development. But now we're starting to see other private investment coming through. It's a good sign, isn't it?
Absolutely. And I'm reminded of the saying, an Abraham Lincoln quote, if he had 6 hours to cut down the tree, he'd spend the first 5 sharpening the axe. And so what we're seeing
Sounds like Sarah.
is sharpening the axe. Well, I don't know where they got if they steal the quote. But it's interesting in business is progress is the number one motivator for people. And it's the same thing what we're seeing around the rebuild is seeing that progress is a huge motivator. And as we see more progress, that energy will just continue to build and build and build. And that's kind of really good for us as a city to be able to see that and be able to feel it. And one of our biggest opportunities is that we actually get to start rebuilding a new city right now. And the government's committed a $15 billion investment into making sure that that's going to be right. And my question to people right now is, if you could start with a blank sheet of paper and build an absolutely amazing city, what would it look like? And that's what we're starting to do.
Okay.
And what we're finding now is those international businesses are recognising that Christchurch is a real viable option for them, which is going to create jobs and it's going to create economic growth.
It's a fair comment. Megan, you can't argue with that. There is progress in the city, that's great. But what is troubling for Labour, though, is that although the political landscape in Christchurch is probably more Labour-leaning, it always has been, National is going fantastic in the national polls. You're in a bad situation, Labour-wise, aren't you?
Well, I think that one of the things you have to look at, and I don't know how many times I've said this.
Don't start saying about the Greens.
No, it's about coalition politics, and it always is going to be.
Governments, I know.
This is
but
about a government.
I understand that, Megan, what I'm saying, but Labour's in trouble.
Labour is not in trouble. You look at many of the polls, there's about 2 or 3 points difference in it. And we've had Bill English saying that as well, that this is going to be a tight election in terms of left of centre.
Well,
what's happened is National doesn't have coalition, any big coalition
but
partners
the latest Roy Morgan poll suggested National could govern alone. Labour still needs all its friends.
Yeah, and the Roy Morgan poll that we saw 2 weeks before that had 3-point difference in it, that we're seeing huge volatility in the polls, and that's not surprising. Because one of the things that I'm picking up, and we've done a huge amount of voter contact in Wigram since the beginning of the year, thousands of voter contacts, and what we're seeing is a large number of people on the party vote who are undecided, and we're going to continue to see volatility in the polls. This is going to be a tight election. I think that's one of the few things that Labour and National are agreeing on in terms of going into this election about how tight this is going to be.
One final question before we go. The cathedral. Do we pull the rest of it down or do we save it? Yes or no, Carl?
Can I just come back and address that?
We've only got 30
question?
seconds.
Look, I think we just let the people of Christchurch have their say around it.
Megan Woods.
I'd like to see the cathedral saved.
Really?
I would.
Oh, please.
It's an important part of our heritage.
All right, well, I want to talk about that. Megan Woods, Carl Valley, appreciate your time tonight, guys. Thanks for coming on the show. We'll get you back. Thank you, Megan. Nice to see you.
Good to see you.
And your perfume smells nice too.
Oh, thanks. Nice to meet you.
It does, it's really nice actually. Well, finally tonight, as I was talking about the campaign to save the cathedral, it nearly came to an end last week, didn't it? An order preventing the deconstruction of the building was lifted by the High Court. Now, let's be clear about the court facts here. The judge said the church property trustees have committed to construction of a new cathedral. They gave fair consideration to the issues and there was no evidence that improper motives affected the decision. I've always admired Jim Anderton's tenacity and his level-headedness whenever I've interviewed him. But surely there comes a time when he just needs to say, stop, concede defeat, and allow Christchurch to progress. Ironically, it's been the church that has risen again and fairly quickly. They built the transitional cathedral in a matter of months. While not everybody liked the concept, it has been largely embraced by the community. The Save the Cathedral website says if the leadership of the Anglican Church in Christchurch had not been so committed to the deconstruction of the cathedral would have been on the way to restoration by now. But if the church was able to just get on with its own business, the foundations for the contemporary construction could have been poured by now. I was brought up in Christchurch. I have fond memories of walking up the cathedral when friends from out of town stayed. It was usually on the sightseeing list. Its interior highlighted architectural brilliance. But for some reason, the anti-demo crew won't acknowledge a younger generation who might actually like a contemporary design that represents them, and if not, at least progress. The argument to retain the building has always been based on emotion. That's it. Now more than ever, that just seems selfish. And it is disappointing to hear that various groups are already considering fighting resource consent applications to prevent the deconstruction. For goodness sake, get over it. Sometimes in life, you will never get what you want, and the court process has proved that. So instead of resisting change and something new, let's get behind the church and encourage progress in a time when there seems like there is none. And to get in contact with us, you can email me, chris@newstalkzb.co.nz. We're also on Facebook, facebook.com/lynchnz. You can also follow me on Twitter. But from all of us here at CTV, good night.